I thought being an only child would mean my parents loved me no matter what. But one rainy morning, my life changed forever. They looked at me like I was a stranger, not a child, not family, just a failure. "I can't believe you're still living like this," my mother said, her voice trembling, though not with sadness, more like disgust. "After everything we've done for you, this is all you've become?" And my father? He didn't even look at me. He just shook his head, muttering something about disappointment. I didn't understand it at first. I'd always thought that love wasn't about money. I was wrong. I'd moved back home after college, trying to save money and figure out what to do with my life, but apparently, just existing wasn't enough for them. I, I'm trying, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I just need a little time." Time? They didn't have any for me, not anymore. That day, my parents told me they were cutting me off. They wanted me out of their house by the end of the week. No money, no support, no family. Just me, my backpack, and a world that suddenly felt much colder than before. I packed my things in silence. Each item I shoved into my bag felt like a memory being ripped from me. My childhood, my room, my sense of safety, it was all disappearing. As I walked out the door, I felt something I hadn't felt before. A strange, burning determination. I wasn't going to stay down. I wouldn't. Not for long. And yet, a small voice in my head whispered, maybe this was my fault. Maybe I hadn't been enough. The strange thing was, there were signs I hadn't noticed. Small messages, subtle hints from people around me. Friends who looked uncomfortable when my parents spoke, relatives who avoided eye contact, and emails. Odd little messages from old contacts, congratulating me on things I hadn't yet achieved. At the time, I brushed it off. I had bigger problems. My parents had disowned me, and I had no idea where to go next. But I didn't know it yet. The truth I would discover 2 weeks later would destroy my entire family. Because what I didn't realize then was that my life was about to flip completely upside down. And when it did, the people who had cast me out would have no idea who I really was. I slept that first night on a friend's couch, the rain still pattering outside. I kept thinking about how they had always taught me that hard work mattered more than money. Yet here they were, judging me purely for what I didn't have. And that was when it hit me. If they could be so cruel, if they could dismiss me so easily, maybe I needed to rethink everything. I needed to rebuild. I needed a plan. And I needed revenge, though I didn't know it yet, because something strange had started to happen. While I had been struggling, working small jobs, saving pennies, a secret had been growing quietly in the background. Something I hadn't paid attention to, something that would one day turn my entire world around. Something that had nothing to do with money, and yet would change everything. And I had no idea it existed. But the first hint appeared in an unexpected place: my old laptop. When I opened it that night, a notification popped up, a message from a company I'd started years ago, long forgotten. It was dormant, quiet, invisible. But someone had just tried to contact it, someone serious. I stared at the screen, my heart racing. Could this be real? Could this be the chance I'd been waiting for? I didn't know yet, but the next few days would reveal more than I could ever imagine. Because by the end of the week, I wouldn't just be homeless, I would be unstoppable. And my parents, they were about to regret every word they had said. But first, I had to survive. The week passed in a blur. Every morning, I woke up on a different friend's couch, feeling more like a ghost than a person. But each night, I returned to that laptop. The messages kept coming, Small, cryptic emails at first, reminders about contracts, updates about the company I had started in college. My little side project that I'd abandoned years ago had grown. Somehow, without me noticing, it had grown bigger than I could have imagined. I opened one email and froze. The numbers on the screen were staggering. My company, my forgotten tiny startup, was now worth millions. Millions! And someone had just offered to buy it. I laughed, a bitter, shaky sound that my friend looked at me strangely for. "This can't be real," I whispered, but it was. I spent the next 2 days digging into the accounts. Every statistic, every number, every report confirmed it. I was sitting on a gold mine. And then the thought hit me. If my parents thought money was the measure of my worth, I had all the proof I needed to show them. But even as I felt a spark of excitement, there was a deeper, darker feeling underneath. Suspicion. Why hadn't anyone told me? Why had no one reached out sooner? And why now? The strange emails became more frequent. They weren't just business inquiries. They were questions about me, about my life, my habits, and someone was watching. I tried to shrug it off. Maybe it was investors, maybe it was partners, but deep down I knew it was bigger than that. Meanwhile, my parents called. At first it was casual, small talk, pretending they hadn't just thrown me out. "How's life?" my mother asked, her voice too cheerful, too fake. But then came the subtle digs, comments about my apartment, my car, my wardrobe, my bank account. I realized they were testing me. They wanted to see if I was still nothing. I kept my cool. I played the role of the struggling child. I let them underestimate me, just as they always had. But I also started planning. Every conversation, every call, every email, they were pieces of a puzzle, and I was beginning to see the picture. There was more at stake than just money. There were secrets in our family, things hidden behind polite smiles and closed doors, things that I had never known, but that were about to surface. And then one night, it happened. A knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it slowly. A courier handed me a small envelope, no return address. Inside was a single USB drive. Attached to it, a note in elegant handwriting. "Your parents didn't tell you everything. This will explain why." My hands shook as I held it. I felt a rush of fear, excitement, and anger all at once. I didn't know what was on that drive, but I knew one thing. My life was about to change again. And that was the moment everything changed. Because when I plugged it in, the files I found would make me realize just how wrong I had been about my family, about loyalty, and about who really mattered. The first file opened, and my heart stopped. The screen blinked to life, and the first file was a video. My parents, my mother and father, speaking in hushed tones, but the camera was hidden somewhere in our house. My stomach twisted. "I can't believe it's gotten this far," my mother whispered, her voice trembling. "He has no idea." "No idea about what?" my father replied, irritation in his tone. "He's still useless, living in that tiny apartment. He doesn't deserve to know anything about the company yet." The word company made my blood run cold. They were talking about me, my startup, my life, my future, and they had been watching, planning, scheming. I felt a surge of anger so sharp it made my vision blur. Every insult, every disapproval, every moment they had ever made me feel worthless. This explained it. They weren't angry about who I was. They were angry about what I had. And they hadn't just abandoned me out of frustration. They were hiding something, manipulating me. I had been a pawn in their game. The next file was a document, bank transfers, contracts, and legal papers. My parents had secretly controlled parts of my company, influencing decisions from the shadows. They had been testing me, seeing if I would fail, all while plotting to take over the business once it became valuable. I sat frozen. All the times they criticized me for being poor. It wasn't about me. It was about control. It was about power. And then I noticed something even stranger. A series of emails to someone named M. It seemed they had been planning to sell my company without telling me, quietly moving money and assets into accounts I couldn't access. My hands shook as I realized the stakes. They weren't just cruel, they were dangerous. I had to act fast. Over the next days, I began secretly contacting my investors, lawyers, and old colleagues. I needed to secure my company before they could make a move. Every call, every email, every meeting felt like a game of chess, and I had finally learned to play. Meanwhile, my parents' messages increased. They acted like everything was normal, asking about my job search, my life plans, their words dripping with fake concern. But I had seen the truth. I had the files, the proof, and the knowledge of their betrayal. I was no longer a powerless child, and yet a part of me couldn't shake the fear. How far would they go to keep their control? Then one night, I got a mysterious call from a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was calm, almost cold. "They know you have the files," the person said. "You're in danger. Be careful." Before I could ask who they were, the line went dead. I stared at the phone, my heart racing. They knew. Someone had tipped them off. And that's when the first real threat appeared. My apartment door had been slightly ajar. Nothing was missing, but the lock had clearly been tampered with. I realized then that this was bigger than money. It was about control, secrets, and family betrayal. And worse, what I discovered next would make me question everything I thought I knew about my parents. The next morning, I decided to confront them. Carefully, strategically. I wasn't going to let them intimidate me any longer. I showed up at their house, carrying nothing but the USB drive and a calm exterior. Inside, everything was eerily normal. The smell of fresh bread, the hum of the refrigerator, their smiles hiding nothing. "I just wanted to talk," I said, "about everything." My mother's eyes narrowed, my father's jaw tightened. "About what?" my father asked, his voice laced with fake calm. I placed the USB drive on the table. "I know about the company, about everything, about the plans you had for me." There was a pause, then suddenly my mother laughed. But it wasn't a happy laugh. It was sharp, almost manic. "You don't know anything," she said. "You have no idea what we've done, what you've inherited, what you've lost." I swallowed my fear. "Try me." And then they started. Stories I had never heard, secrets buried for years. My parents had fought tooth and nail to build the company before I was even aware of it. Every mistake they blamed me for. Lies to cover up the truth. Every argument, every disapproval, a test or a manipulation to see if I was capable of more than I realized. I felt my world twist. My anger battled with confusion. My love for them, buried deep, clashed with the hatred I felt for their betrayal. "You were supposed to fail," my father said, his eyes dark. "We needed to know if you could survive without us, if you were worthy of the legacy we built." I couldn't speak. My hands shook. My throat tightened. Worthy? They had disowned me for being poor, yet had been secretly building me up all along. "And the truth," my mother said, leaning forward, "is that you already own the company. But we didn't think you were ready to handle it. Not yet. That's why we pushed you away." I stared. My mind refused to process it. I had been fighting to prove myself to them, thinking I was powerless when the power was mine all along. And that's when I noticed it, a hidden camera, a mirror in the corner, faint wires running along the wall. They hadn't just tested me emotionally, they had monitored everything. Every reaction, every decision, every failure. I felt sick. My life had been manipulated from the start. And yet, beneath the betrayal, beneath the anger, I realized I finally had the ultimate leverage. I was no longer a child, no longer powerless. But the question now was, how far would I go? Because my parents, they were still dangerous, and what I discovered next would push me to the edge and change our family forever. I spent the next few days planning. Every move had to be perfect. My parents were clever, manipulative, and ruthless. They had underestimated me once. They wouldn't make the same mistake again. I started by securing my assets. I changed passwords, rerouted company emails, and contacted lawyers to make sure nothing could be taken from me. Every document I touched was proof of my ownership, every signature legally binding. I had to be untouchable. But the hardest part wasn't the company, it was facing them again. My parents had been a shadow over my life, shaping my world in secret. And now, knowing the truth, I realized how twisted it had all been. One evening, I decided to confront them with evidence. I went back to their house. The air was thick with tension, and I could see in their eyes that they were expecting something. I smiled, calm, controlled. "I've secured everything," I said. "The company is mine, all of it, and I know what you planned." My mother's face paled slightly. My father's jaw tightened, but there was a flicker of respect in his eyes. "You think this is about the company?" my mother said, voice low. "It's never been about the company. It's about proving you could survive, proving you were worthy." I shook my head. "No, it was about control, about humiliating me, about making me feel powerless so you could feel powerful." The silence that followed was deafening. They had no words. They had underestimated me. And that's when I pulled out the final proof, the emails, the hidden contracts, the recordings of their conversations, every plan, every betrayal, every manipulation laid bare. My father's face fell. My mother's eyes widened. "You, you've been keeping all of this?" my mother whispered. "I wasn't keeping it," I said. "I was surviving, and now I'm in control." For the first time, I saw fear, not anger, not disappointment, fear. And then something unexpected happened. They tried to bargain. Promises, apologies, desperate attempts to sway me. "I was just trying to protect you," my father said, voice shaking. "You don't understand the pressure we were under." I felt my chest tighten. I had spent years wanting their approval, their love. But now, their words sounded hollow. I realized love was something they had never truly given me. And that's when I made my choice. I would forgive them, maybe someday. But not now, not before they understood the consequences of their actions. I handed them the USB drive. "You get one chance to be honest," I said. "Tell me everything, or I'll make sure the world knows what you did." The next hour was a confession. Everything spilled out, the secrets, the manipulation, the hidden agendas. Every lie I had believed about myself shattered. And then I realized something terrifying. They hadn't stopped at the company. They had done this with other people, other assets, other lives. Their ambition was endless. I left that night knowing two things. One, I had finally claimed my power. And two, the real danger was just beginning. Because the more I uncovered, the more I realized their network, their influence was massive. And if I wanted true freedom, I would have to outsmart them completely. The days that followed were chaotic. I became obsessed working late nights to untangle the web my parents had spun. Emails, contracts, hidden accounts. Every discovery made me both stronger and more cautious. I realized the company wasn't just mine, it was theirs too, in a twisted way. They had built it with me as the puppet, and now I had to turn the tables. Then came the threats. Subtle at first, emails from unknown addresses, strange cars parked near my apartment, whispers when I walked down the street. But I didn't panic. I had learned to read the signs. I contacted trusted friends, lawyers, and even former employees. Each person I spoke with added pieces to the puzzle, revealing the extent of my parents' manipulations. They had influence everywhere: clients, investors, even board members. And then it happened. My mother called late at night, her voice trembling. "Please, we can fix this. We'll step back. You can have it all. Just don't ruin us." I could hear the fear in her words. They had underestimated me completely. But I wasn't angry like before. I was calculated. I realized the best move wasn't revenge, it was strategy. I had to make them understand I was no longer a pawn. I was the player. Over the next few weeks, I executed my plan. I secured every contract, every asset, and every piece of communication. I made sure that nothing could be used against me. Then I sent a message, a single, clear warning. I know everything. Step back or lose everything. The day of the final confrontation arrived like a storm I had been anticipating for years. I woke up early, my mind buzzing with strategy, planning every word I would say, every move I would make. I wasn't approaching this as the child who had been humiliated, abandoned, and underestimated. I was approaching it as someone who held all the cards. I called my parents to their office under the guise of a family meeting, but this wasn't casual chit-chat. This was the reckoning they had never expected. I arrived, calm and collected, carrying nothing but the USB drive and my unwavering confidence. I had rehearsed my words countless times, but even I couldn't anticipate the weight of standing face to face with the people who had spent my entire life undermining me. When they entered, I noticed the subtle signs: the slight twitch in my mother's hand, the forced composure in my father's stride, the tension that draped over them like a heavy fog. They had been used to controlling me, to reading me like an open book, but this time the roles had reversed. I sat across from them, and for a moment, the room was silent. I let it stretch, a long, heavy pause that made the air feel tight. Then I spoke, slowly, deliberately. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady, "about everything, about the lies, about the manipulation, about the betrayal." My mother's face flickered with surprise, though she quickly masked it with a practiced smile. My father's jaw tightened, but I noticed a flicker of unease in his eyes, something I had never seen before. They had underestimated me, as they always did. "I know everything," I said, leaning slightly forward. "The manipulation, the hidden accounts, the plans to take over my company behind my back, every single word, every single action. I've seen it all." The air was thick with tension. My mother's hand shook slightly as she set a glass of water down on the table. My father didn't interrupt, but his silence was louder than any words. "You think this is about money?" I continued. "It's not. It's about power. It's about control. And you've underestimated me for the last time." I revealed everything I had done over the past weeks, how I had secured the company, ensured no one could manipulate me, and gained complete legal and operational control. I showed them the documents, the contracts, the recordings. Every attempt to control me had been neutralized. For the first time, I saw fear. Not anger, not disappointment, fear. My parents, who had always been the ones holding power, were now vulnerable, exposed, and aware that they could no longer dictate my life. "You've changed," my father said finally, voice low, almost reverent. "You're someone we didn't expect." "I've survived everything you threw at me," I said. "I've survived the humiliation, the abandonment, the lies, and now it's your turn to survive me." The room was silent for a long moment. Then my mother tried to bargain. "We can fix this. We'll step back. You can have everything, just don't ruin us." I felt a strange mix of emotions: triumph, disbelief, anger, and a faint twinge of sadness. Their desperation was palpable, and for the first time I understood the true weight of power. The powerless child they had cast aside had returned, not broken, but stronger, sharper, and unyielding. I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence linger, letting them squirm under the weight of what they had done. Then slowly I said, "I don't want to ruin you. I want you to understand. I want you to know that the game has changed. I am no longer your pawn." For hours they confessed everything, every secret, every plan, every hidden agenda. The full extent of their manipulation poured out, shattering every memory I had of my childhood. Every failure they had blamed on me had been their test. Every harsh word, every rejection, every scorn had been a calculated move in a game they assumed I would never see. And yet, beneath the betrayal, I felt something else: clarity. I realized that my victory wasn't just about reclaiming the company, it was about reclaiming myself, my dignity, and my sense of reality. They had tried to control me, but they had failed. As I left the room that evening, a strange calm settled over me. I had won, yes, but the aftermath, the emotional wreckage, the understanding of what it meant to be free, that journey was only beginning. And somewhere deep down, I knew there was still one revelation left, one truth hidden in the shadows, waiting to fully unravel my world. Weeks passed, and I began to assert complete control over the company. Meetings, investor calls, and strategic decisions consumed my days. Employees respected my leadership. Investors were impressed by my decisiveness, and slowly, the business that had once been a small, forgotten startup flourished under my guidance. But even amid success, I felt the lingering tension of unfinished business. My parents' confessions had revealed much, but they had hinted at one last secret, something they had never fully disclosed. The curiosity gnawed at me. I needed closure. One evening, I returned to their house, not as a child seeking approval, but as a leader commanding authority. I asked them to sit down, insisting on total honesty, on finality. My father looked weary, my mother cautious, but both understood that this wasn't a negotiation. It was a reckoning. "There's one more thing," my father said finally after a long pause. "Something you weren't supposed to discover yet." My heart raced. I leaned forward, every muscle tense. He handed me an envelope. Inside were legal documents, trust papers, stock ownership forms, and signed letters, all proving that part of the company's original foundation had been intentionally set aside for me. Hidden, dormant, waiting for the right moment. They had protected it, not from failure, but to ensure I would one day claim it fully when I was ready. "You were always meant to own this," my mother said softly, tears brimming in her eyes. "Everything we did. It was twisted, yes, but we only wanted to make sure you were ready. We wanted to make sure you could survive, to see if you were strong enough to lead." I stared at the documents, a whirlwind of emotions colliding inside me: relief, anger, love, betrayal, forgiveness, and the weight of years finally lifting. I realized something profound. Their methods had been extreme, their ways cruel, but the intent, as flawed as it was, had been to prepare me. I spent hours reading every document, tracing the legacy of the company back to its foundation, seeing my role in it not as a child being manipulated, but as the rightful owner, the architect of its future. And then I looked at my parents. I could see their regret, their fear, and a glimmer of pride. I realized that forgiveness wasn't immediate, but understanding could begin. The power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. I was no longer the one at their mercy. I was the one who held the future. That night, as I left their house, the sky painted in shades of crimson and gold, I felt a sense of liberation I had never known. Every betrayal, every insult, every moment of humiliation had been a stepping stone to this moment. I was finally free, not just financially, but emotionally and mentally. I had survived the ultimate test, and in the stillness, I made a silent vow. I would never allow anyone to define my worth again. I would build, create, and lead on my own terms. I would remember the lessons of betrayal, but I would not be shackled by them. I smiled as the wind brushed against my face, knowing the journey ahead would be filled with challenges. But I was ready, stronger than ever, unstoppable, and nothing, not betrayal, not family, not fear, could ever take that away. This was only the beginning of a life I had fought to claim, a life that was mine, fully, undeniably, and irrevocably.